everyone, welcome to another Classic Movie Monday, and today we are going to be discussing, in particular, a foreign film, um, one that involves a rather famous martial artist, and one that has been, I think, thoroughly recognized over the years. And as you can see by the title and thumbnail, we're going to be addressing Fists of Fury, also actually known as the Chinese Connection when it initially came out. And this probably confused a bunch of American audiences at the time because there was a similar film that came out, or a similar titled film, I should say, that came out earlier called The French Connection. So the Chinese and the French Connection was kind of fairly similar. At least in the title. So I think a lot of audiences generally got confused as to exactly what the Chinese Connection was supposed to be. And Fists of Fury just sounds a whole lot better, at least in my opinion. So I just like to say this film as the title being Fists of Fury as opposed to the Chinese Connection. But that was a sort of mix-up that occurred when it was initially released within the United States. But basically, this film I think was rather important, and why I classify it as a classic is because it kind of built sort of upon the stepping stone for Bruce Lee's career, which you will see basically a year after this film, he eventually went on to do various other works that sort of ended up kind of increasing his, that ended, I guess you could say, increasing his popularity, not just within China, but also within the United States, and a lot of people within the United States are fairly familiar with Bruce Lee. So basically, Fists of Fury takes place in China, but in sort of 20th century China, where we have the main character whose name, and I want to make sure I pronounce this right, Chen Zhen, played by Bruce Lee, is a martial arts student who ultimately desires to kind of seek revenge on the people that end up killing his master, Huo Yuanjia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but basically, that's really not giving anything away because that's really establishing the plot and really what kind of sets everything else that ends up occurring within motion. And you will also see the Japanese come into play as well. And you'll sort of see the kinds of political elements that were kind of going on within this time period that it tries to set itself up in. And they do try to portray the Japanese as those who have a lot of influence and power, and how they kind of use that to their advantage. And basically, that's really how the plot is pretty much carried throughout. It doesn't really seem to deviate too much from that whole setup. And I think what audiences can really gander from the whole Bruce Lee image is the fact that the way he executes martial arts shows you how dedicated he is to his craft. I mean, it's unbelievable, the fight choreography and the amount of sheer quickness that I guess you could say comes from the way in which Bruce Lee sort of fights throughout this film in particular. And I think that's something that really grabbed audiences' attention. I think largely the whole setup into how everything was choreographed from a fighting standpoint. And overall, the story within and of itself, even though we might consider it somewhat simple, it sort of builds upon itself and creates interesting commentary onto things. And you also have these very genuinely likable protagonists, along with Bruce Lee's character, sort of pitching in some way within the plot, which you will see if you choose to watch the film. But really, it is designed to be very stylish, and what I like too about it is it tries to display this sense of sort of more realism, or at least trying to be on the realms of a little bit more realistic, as opposed to other films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which you can obviously tell that they would have needed some wires or something so they could jump, and it's very stylized, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Whereas with Bruce Lee, there's a little bit more of a down-to-earth approach to the way things are ultimately executed. Yes, you could say that there's probably some things that they did to maybe, I guess you could say, make it easier from a choreography standpoint to ultimately shoot the final product. But I think at the end of the day, it does try to base itself on the actual artistry behind the martial arts, which you will see Bruce Lee do extensively of within this film. And I think it ultimately works and is a very interesting and well-recognized foreign film. And I think it is one of the major films that did really gander a name for Bruce Lee and eventually propelled his career, as well as, bringing in the whole martial arts concepts to Western culture. So I think, in a way, this film has a lot of interesting things that I think ultimately allow it to be a classic, in my humble list of opinions. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this film without giving too much away. I think there was a lot of passion behind it, and you can really see the emotions that Bruce Lee's character ends up going through as you see the film progress. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's an interesting and very solid start to other projects that eventually Bruce Lee ended up sort of participating in and being sort of the main star of. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say about this film without really giving too much away as to what exactly happens and who is involved. But again, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I would be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care.